All right, Michael, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
All right, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk to you more.
I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I thought we could start just with a quick introduction on yourself. For those who don't
Yeah,
know you, or maybe our friends on the East Coast who don't know Aspire, can you give us
yeah,
like the quick intro?
absolutely. So my name is Michael Wimbish. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Aspire Public Schools. We are a charter management organization in California. So we operate 36 charter schools across three regions in California. So the Bay Area, Oakland, Richmond, East Palo Alto, the Central Valley, which spans Sacramento, Modesto, Stockton, Lodi area, and then the Los Angeles area. And so I have been in this role for a little bit over 5 years, moved into the role in February 2021. I've been with Aspire coming up on 8 years. I originally joined as the director of finance, and then prior to that, I had the opportunity to serve for about 11 years. I started my career in the corporate finance space. I worked for Intel, worked for Clorox in corporate finance capacities before making the transition to the education sector. So
I love it, and I think the one of the reasons I was super excited to talk to you was you do you do bring the unique background. You know, a lot of
yeah,
times we talk to folks and they're like born out of the school environment,
yeah,
and not everybody's had that sort of big corporate experience and then transitioned into the education space, and so I think you bring a unique perspective. You
yeah,
also mentioned starting, this role in 2021, super
yeah,
interesting time to step into the seat. You've
yeah,
got COVID, crazy
yeah,
funding changes, like enrollment going all
yeah.
over the place. And so, fast forward 5 years, we're recording this in March of 2026. I wanted to start just by asking about like when you think about the current moment in charter school finance,
Mhm.
how would you describe the current environment we're in right now? And how does
Yeah.
it maybe feel different than a number of years ago?
Yeah, so in my seat, I would honestly use the analogy of like a juggler. Like it feels like there are like multiple different balls in the air. You're trying not to drop one. You got like declining enrollment over here. You got oversight authorizer stuff over here. You got like all this types of things, and you're trying to like balance it all. And I would say like as it relates to like where we are now versus 5 years ago, like what's changed like so much. I mean, even from just oversight requirements. I think one of the things, the blessing and the curse coming out of the pandemic in California was that also California introduced a number of new categorical funding programs. So like
Mm,
expanded learning, TK, community schools, which are great programs. Obviously, additional funding allows us to do some great things, and each of them come with their separate oversight, allowable, you like all the things, and so like that's one way, and then kind of on the operational side, it probably seems crazy to think about this, but there was once a time where it felt like enrollment was just automatic, right? It was like
right.
you automatically had 500 students, or you were automatically at full enrollment
Yeah.
with
Waiting
with
list for
yeah,
days. Yeah.
waiting lists with kind of minimal effort, which seems crazy now because it's kind of like, how does that happen? And fast forward now, obviously we know the environment we're in terms of enrollment and recruitment and things of that nature. So I would say like those are, some of the big changes, from where 5 years ago.
So how does that inform priorities for you right now when you think about like what are the big pillars of navigating the current environment? How do you think about that?
So I think about I mean, I think there's a couple different layers to that. I think there's obviously like the fiscal sustainability pieces of it, and making sure you're navigating that. I think there's a big compliance aspect of it, and I think the environment has changed to where like you have to get like an A+ on oversight and compliance and like all the things, and that's become super important. And so, I think as I navigate that, or as we navigate that particularly on the financial sustainability, like one framework that's been helpful, and I want to just caveat like I was not the originator of this framework. CSGF, Charter School Growth Fund, actually introduced this framework and kind of saw it from them at one of their conferences and gatherings. So I just want to put that out there. But it's been really helpful for me just to think about the financial sustainability challenges and just all the things. And it started out as the 4 E's framework.
Okay.
And those 4 E's were, ESSER, which is, the one-time funding from the federal government and how that is coming to an end or was coming to an end. The economy, which, we know that there's all kind of different levels of uncertainty in our economic environment. Enrollment, which we talked about, like the declining enrollment, and then educators, like the need or the continuing need to like hire and retain
Mm.
strong people and the cost that comes along with that in this environment. And all of that is against, if you think about all the backdrop of increasing student needs, and so, like, how do you balance that, meet your mission in a way that's also, like, balancing all those things and fiscally, sustainable, I think is the thing that keeps me up at night, I guess, if you from that perspective is, like, how are you juggling or balancing all those different things?
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned it was originally the 4 E's. How
Oh,
has it
yeah.
changed?
Yeah.
I assume Esther dropped off. How do you
Yeah,
think what's
yeah.
the 4th letter these days?
Yeah, so that it's same concept, but it's like we said 3 E's and 1 O. I know that's probably not super catchy, but it worked for us. And that O being one-time funding. In the state of California, again, we were fortunate actually, as ESSER came to an end, the state has actually introduced some new state one-time funding pots. So fortunate in that, and we also know that those are decreasing, and at some point will be coming to an end as well. So I think it's just the overall concept of like we were fortunate to have buckets of one-time funding that we could
Mhm.
use and put to good use, and as those come to an end, obviously we have to, right size and do the things that we have to do as an org to be fiscally sustainable once
Right.
that one-time money runs out.
Yeah, I think the framework is super helpful, and especially for others who maybe haven't thought about fiscal sustainability through that lens. How do you feel like for you and the finance team, how do you feel like the 3 E's 1O framework influences your decision making? Like how do you use the framework practically when you're thinking about, okay, we're looking long term
Yeah.
around financial sustainability. Um, how are you kind of running things through that framework in terms of
Yeah.
priorities or otherwise?
Yeah, so I would say first before we even get there, I think it's been most helpful as a communication tool, and just like I think we at Aspire have tried to be really intentional about being like open and transparent across our
Mm,
org with the financial challenges, financial realities, and this is a framework we've actually used across the org. And my experience has been that like it's a framework that resonates. Folks get it,
yeah,
right?
help people put
It
things
helps
in their
people put in
brain. Like, oh
perspective,
yeah.
right? It doesn't all it may mean that we don't land in the place that folks may desire, but at least at the very least they can like understand the thought process. Everyone gets that the economy is very volatile, right? Like
Mhm.
people can resonate with that. So I would say first and foremost has been immensely helpful in just our ability to communicate transparently across our organization. As far as like tactical things and frameworks, it's actually very helpful. In our last budget cycle, we kind of took this approach of a tiered school approach. So a lot of times you may see tiered school approaches like when it comes to like academic or programmatic items where, I know a lot of times school leaders and just at our schools, we may tier supports, right? Tiered supports to schools based on their need. And so we took a kind of similar approach of like tiering our schools from a financial perspective. So looking at the different financial metrics, days of cash, operating profit, reserve levels, all the things, and being able to tier our schools in a way that I think gave us a couple things. One, it allowed us you talked about priorities, and it allowed us to like, develop those priorities and really we're operating across 36 schools. So, we're trying to determine where we may need to lean in a little bit more, provide
Yeah,
like
that's a
more
lot of
intentional.
schools to keep track of. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so like everyone can't be everywhere, but at least
Right.
some little framework of where we may need to lean in. And it helped us. We actually went through, and again, it's never like I always say, like it's always art, a little bit art and science, right? It's never like 100% black and white, but we did go through of developing like a decision tree framework that it could at
Okay.
least help us guide our process of like, if this is true, what does this dictate from a budget decision? If it's not true, what's the next variable you look at? Okay. If that's not true, what's the next variable you look at? And again, it's never perfect. There's always what I call corner cases still that don't fit inside those boxes. But I will say that it's helpful as a starting point, certainly,
Mhm.
and something that you could use to kind of frame decision making and at least, talk more, discuss more throughout the process.
What are some of those metrics? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure others who are listening, you know, may be on the finance team at their organization or leading the finance function. What are some of the metrics that you incorporated as a team into that decision tree framework? Because to your point, you've got a ton of schools. You got to figure out like what's going on at a high level. How are we using metrics as a canary in the coal mine for
Yeah.
potential problems down the road. You alluded to a couple, like days cash on hand or reserves. What are just a few of the metrics that you all keep a close pulse on across the whole
Yeah.
36 campus network?
Yeah, I would say so those 2 you mentioned. In addition to those, I would say, the kinda standard around, like, operating profit, we wanna make sure that at least over time, right, our, each individual site is able to operate, in the black, right, and has a
Mhm.
solid operating profit. We also, have what, are called coverage ratios. So we have a group of our schools that have been financed over the years, and so there are specific, coverage ratios that we have as part of our covenants that measure how much coverage you have relative to your debt requirements. And
Got
so
it.
that's something that we have to keep a pulse on. Then I would say in the same vein as like cash and reserves, things like your current ratio, which like measures your near term liquidity. You may recall back in that to what actually when I came into this seat, one of the big things we were planning for was deferrals. And so, a lot and even, we're not in that state right now in California, but you never know, right? And so like also like those ratios around liquidity to make sure that if there is, those cases, deferrals or whatever it may be, that we're in a position as a org to be able to ride it out.
Yeah, yeah, totally. You talked a little bit about the challenge of, finance is part art, part science. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it because a lot of times it's easy to say, oh, well, finance is just, it's all metrics. It's all in the numbers. And I think you're hitting on the reality that, we're balancing decisions around mission and student need and
Mhm.
enrollment impacts, and there's humans on the other side of these numbers. We're trying to retain our strong staff. How do you feel like that kind of push pull comes into play
Yeah.
as you think about, my job is to ensure the long term financial stability of the organization, but I'm also here to, like, our team is here to support the mission. How do you
Yeah.
think about that sort of
Yeah.
constant push pull?
Yeah, I mean, push pull is a great way to put it because that's exactly what it is between like, at the end of the day, we know our mission is to provide, like here at Aspire, a high quality education to our students, many from underserved communities. And so that's our mission. And we feel, passionate about that. And we also know we have to do that in a financially sustainable way.
Right.
And we also know that I mean, just put it bluntly, the reality is like, we are not funded in a way that allows us to do like all the things we would want and need to do. And so there's always we talk a lot around like trade-offs, acknowledging that like we wish it wasn't like this, but like the reality is as we think about those and that push-pull, we're often faced with trade-offs, right? On a variety of different fronts of, can we offer these supports? Well, if we offer these supports here and invest here, we, may not be able to invest as much over here. And so there's always that push pull. There's always
Mhm.
that tension. And so like balancing that is tricky, right? And we talked a little bit about frameworks. And I would say like an example, like when you talk about the art of it is, I can remember a situation where at one of our schools, we got into a discussion specifically like around like instructional supports at the school, right, relative to budgets. And there was a very intentional decision. There was a rising third grade class where, for a variety of reasons, there was, we were saying we wanted to be able to invest really intentionally around like additional instructional supports,
Mm,
and things of that nature. And so, like, from that discussion and looking at data and things like that, we actually made a very intentional decision, at least in the short term, as much as we could, to like have like really small like cohort sizes for that grade span, that, like 15-ish type, 15, 17, which we know, like, unfortunately, that's not like long term sustainable to have that for like every grade level. But like, given kind of where we were at that time and just the nature of, the investment that we felt needed there, that was a very intentional kind of like art, is to some degree decision that we made
right.
to try to balance, like, at least in, again, short term, the balance of like achieving the mission and also like the financial sustainability component of it.
Yeah, I wanna build on that idea of short-term investments, because one of your letters in the framework was shifting
Mhm.
the ESSER to one-time funding, and one-time funding obviously creates a temptation to expand programs and commitments and, uh
Yeah,
the balance of what gets a one-time investment versus what needs
yeah,
to be funded in perpetuity. How have you all thought about those
yeah,
decisions? And like the example you just gave is a great example of, hey, we know we can't do this long term, but this makes a ton of sense right now. How do you
yeah,
communicate that with staff, or what does that
yeah.
conversation look like as you think about the one-time funds?
Yeah, so we have been really intentional around tying our, investments, like, I think compensation is an example, right? Tying our compensation investments to the ongoing funding profile. And
Hmm.
so, like, and it does work both ways, right? So, I think it was 22, 23, and 23, 24, plus or minus. But the LCFF, which LCFF is our per pupil funding formula in California, was higher than normal. I think one year was like it grew at 13%, another year it grew at 8%. And so in those years, we actually invested close to that amount. If you look at the rate of like salary increases, it was very closely aligned to those amounts. And then conversely, like, even in our current environments where the per pupil funding increase is closer to 2 to 3%, we've been very clear that like that will need to match our ongoing commitments. And so we tried to be very intentional both ways on that, and then acknowledge that, like, given that, the one-time funding, we're using it in places that are not ongoing commitments. So you think about maybe equipment purchases, like tech purchases, things of that nature. There may be, you may have opportunities to do like retention bonuses or like signing, like, so we have tried to be very clear in that delineation. The one thing I will name in that's always tricky to navigate is, of course, in our business, 75 to 80% of our costs are personnel. And
Right.
so, particularly when you have like big buckets, it can be tricky to be able to figure out a way to spend that in a way that's not an ongoing commitment, but also like gets you bang for your buck. I
Right.
know one of the things we have done to try to balance that is, there are times where we create interim positions and things are, intentionally invest. And I will say, I think that makes sense on the ground, and I think there have been benefits. And I will just say, like, I do think one thing that I kind of learned over time is like, even if it's interim and it's titled interim, everybody agrees on it interim. The experience becomes that that's permanent. Like, if
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like from a school leader perspective or from a school perspective,
Right.
that's human nature, right? It's like, I've
Of
had
course.
this role for last year. It was great. I
Yeah.
know it's titled interim, but it feels permanent. And so,
Right.
that was just, I just throw that out there as like one learning as
A
we
good call
navigate
out.
this, is
Yeah.
like, interim is all good, makes sense, and the practical reality of that sometimes, a lot of times, can be
Yeah.
different, and how do you navigate that?
Right. We can't lose Michael. He was amazing. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. It seems like a big part of this is, intentionality,
yeah,
communication, setting expectations. A lot of that is maybe the soft skills or the EQ side
mhm,
of being a finance leader. How do you all as an organization think about prioritizing communication and also just practically speaking, 36 schools, you're spread across a huge geographic region. How do you all get people on the same page in terms of where the organization is at financially, how you all are thinking through some of these push-pull trade-offs, communications around
Yeah.
staffing? What does that look like? What have you all learned on the kind of transparency and communication front?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like I mentioned, like we have tried to be very intentional on the comm side and, over communicate where we can and then be transparent. I think some of the things you mentioned, we're a 36 school network that we have done is we probably for the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually done budget webinars around the January preliminary budget release and then the May revised release where, we explain kind of, we give a download on the budget, right, in terms of the mechanics and the, funding is going here and that, but also give some insight and framework into like how we're thinking about it. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? What are the things we're monitoring? And also like allow for some Q&A generally. So that's one way. Again, it doesn't capture everything, but I think it's one way we've done it. And also we've had cases where with our leaders, we've had like leader convenings in the past where we've had like I guess call it fireside chat or whatever have
Sure.
you, where we kind of do a similar download and also allow for question and answer and just cover. So those are some of the things, just kind of broader org communications that we have made consistent staples. So those are consistent things. In fact, what would it be? Last month, maybe I think, but we did a budget webinar related to the January prelim, and so those are just consistent staples of our communication when it comes to like financial matters. And so I think that's been helpful to at least bring folks under the hood, allow for some questions, and yeah, from a larger org perspective.
Okay, so quick in the weeds question. Who
Yeah,
is actually invited to that budget webinar? And then how do you like, is this everybody? Is it just the principals? Is it, do you have
yeah.
specific leader cutoffs? And then
It's
same question for that like leader gathering, because others who are listening to this are probably thinking, oh, maybe we could do that, but like
yeah.
who needs to get that comms and how should we think about what's appropriate for different audiences?
So the budget webinar, I believe we do it through like YouTube. So it's available to everyone.
Everybody
So
has
it yeah,
access. Yeah,
everyone has it. There's a calendar invite we send out with the link. I believe we do it. I had to defer to my tech team, but like I believe we like broadcast it via YouTube. And so
cool.
there is a live webinar that they can log into and listen to, and also like a recording that they can access afterwards. So that is the entire org. We also this past year like actually solicited, allowed teammates to submit questions ahead of that. And so at the end of it, I actually answered the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and or provided kind of resources for those questions. So that's the webinars, everybody. The space with our leaders that we've had in past years has been our principals and our regional leaders. So that has been a space where we've kind of that space wasn't just for budget, but it was already a space that we were bringing leaders together in. And so then we decided as one of the agenda items, oh, it's like a 2 day maybe convening
Yeah.
to cover just the kind of, we call it the financial state of Aspire, right? And go into both the state budget dynamics and then the Aspire specific dynamics, metrics, all of those things. So yeah, and again, yeah, I think we've I think gotten generally positive feedback just along the helpfulness of those sessions and those opportunities.
One of the things that has been a countless refrain that I've heard from school leaders, particularly finance leaders, is one of the challenges being making sure that the finance speak, for lack of a better term, is like understandable and relatable and translatable by principals. And I'm guessing I was curious to ask you this because you have 36 schools.
Mhm.
Presumably, you've got some super savvy
Yeah,
principals
absolutely.
who are like, have been reading P&Ls for years and years and years. And then you've got other principals who really strong on the academic side, got promoted, they're, worked their way up to principal, but they're like, hey, I never had to manage the budget in the same way. How does your team enable those types of follow-up discussions where it's like, okay, we do the state of the organization, but then there's presumably all sorts of one-on-one conversations that have to happen after that. How do you all think
Yep.
about or enable staff to understand sort of the implications for them on the, the finance side?
Yeah, so I mean, we're really blessed to have a really like capable and strong finance team. And so we have the way we're structured is we have a finance director in each of the regions that is, tactically managing the budgeting and forecasting for each of the sites in their region. And so, you like you said, you start with the broader communication to your point that doesn't cover it all or get at everything. But really, I think our finance team is also really good around being able to kind of carry on that message in a way that's understandable, but also in a way that allows for, I can't count it's countless times where I know they've had one-on-ones with principals or different forms, and they're always making themselves available as needed to have those kind of offline discussions or just Q&A or what have you. And so, like I think to your point, like I'm not going to get the opportunity to have a one-on-one with all 36 principals,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I think having a strong team that kind of mission aligned, thinks in a similar vein and kind of also is good at translating the finance speak as you mentioned is yeah invaluable. And so I think that through that structure I think we've tried to do to accomplish that.
All right, as we come towards the end of our conversation here, I want to ask about forward planning, looking ahead. A lot's
Yeah,
changed. A lot's changed in the last
a
5 years.
lot, yeah.
A lot will change in the next 5 years. Some of it known, a lot of it very unknown. How are you all starting to plan? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years out. I know enrollment has gotten more challenging, especially in California. How what are some of the data points you all are looking at? Give us like the quick view on forward looking.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I think, we are definitely there are much more in the way as you can imagine of like just deeper data dives, deeper data engagement as we think about enrollment. I mentioned earlier, like 5, 6 years ago, pre-pandemic, it felt like it was kind of autopilot enrollment. And so, I think as we think about that, we are obviously like indexing a lot on historical trends and really getting into the data around like even I can know like this concept of like again, it may seem like it should have always been the thing, but like even this concept of like, hey, if I want to get I'm making up numbers, but if I want to get my enrollment to 450, my first day enrollment has to be 500 because
Right,
we know
right.
historically that you're going to have some attrition, you're going to have some mid-year drops, you're going to have some different things that happen. And so like trying to incorporate that into our enrollment process and projections to understand like what that looks like. The other area that I think there's more opportunity for us to dig deeper in from a data perspective is also just understanding like neighborhood demographic trends. The bulk of our students, a lot of our students come from the, not surprisingly, like the neighborhoods, that are close by, and
Sure.
even within our regions, there's a lot of different demographic trends going on. So really, like I think peeling back the onion there is an opportunity, or more, I should say, to really be able to inform kind of our forecast. And I would just say, from a budget or finance perspective, we try and we don't get this perfect. But I think there's always also this push pull around like, I think in this world you kind of have to err on the side of conservatism.
Yeah.
So I think there's always this push pull there too as well. But also like, understanding the data, understanding the historical trends, and understanding that, there's areas you may have to be a little bit more cautious and hope to like be cautious but over deliver. Just given our kind of current environment. Or I should say hope to over deliver given our current environment.
Where do you go for advice, Michael? That might seem like a silly question, but there's only so many charter networks in the country that are operating as many schools as you all are. And that list dwindles, when you get into the 40 plus campus range. The problem set your team is dealing with is significantly more complex than maybe a two school operator.
Yeah,
where have you found beneficial resources or opportunities for advice in the broader ecosystem
yeah.
that have benefited you as a CFO?
So I am fortunate. I feel like I have a ton of resources and a couple different layers. I think it starts with my direct boss. Previously, it was Mala Batra as the CEO, and now Bess Kennedy is our executive director of kind of our central support. So they, have always been great thought partners. I can always come to them and like bounce things off of them and things of that nature. So that I would say it starts there. I've also been fortunate enough in the finance specific aspect to I had an opportunity a couple years ago to go through the Fox Fellowship Program, which is a program
Yeah.
sponsored by CSGF and others that specifically I was in the finance and operations piece of it, and through that, and also just other connections. I have a coach, Carrie Stewart, who's been in the industry for a ton of time, a ton of experience. Who I've been able to maintain a relationship. I also was fortunate before I took on the CFO role. We had an interim CFO, Matt Shaw, who's also worked in capacity for like Rocket Ship and other charters. And I maintain a relationship with him. So like I have, really access to really experienced leaders who I can just like call and like say, hey, I'm kind of dealing with this. Like, what do you think, or what have you seen? And then finally, I would say the other piece that's been invaluable is CSGF. So they sponsor and kind of host a CFO cohort where there are finance leaders from across California charters. And just even beyond just like the obviously the insight, because most of the time what you find is like 95% of the time what I'm dealing with, others are dealing with
Right.
simultaneously or have dealt with. And
Hmm.
so being able to understand how they approach and how they think. And I think there's also like as maybe silly as it may sound, I think there's power in knowing that you're not alone, right? And like you're not
Totally.
crazy, like you're not crazy
Yeah.
that it's not like some failing of yours
Right.
that this is happening and that others really smart people and really like brilliant people are facing the same thing. And so, having access to those kind of three layers, I've been super fortunate and honestly can say like, yeah, it's been invaluable to have those different folks and different layers of mentorship that I can depend on.
All right. We always end with two questions or two similar questions. The
Sure.
first is, if you had to just pick one piece of advice to give a fellow charter finance leader facing all the uncertainty we've talked about over the next 12 to 24 months, what would you pick, or what would it be?
This may sound like because I feel like the answer should be like maybe some sort of like very technical or like finance
Build a
thing,
cash.
but
Yeah.
honestly, mine is like transparency. I'm really, really big on like transparent and open communication, even with across the org, like not just within finance, but like across the
Yeah.
org, and really like one thing I found is like I'm a firm believer that um, of course everyone will not always agree with you, but I've found that 99.9% or 99% of people, if they know that you've been thoughtful about an issue, if they know that it's well thought out, you're open to feedback, you're open to input, that even if you land in a place that they don't agree with, they appreciate the process that you got to, and they appreciate they're like, hey, this is well thought out and this is something that you're taking seriously, and therefore can again, at least they're not gonna like 100% of your decisions, but at least can, to a certain degree get behind or like understand, right? And so I think
Mhm.
like open and honest dialogue is important and really telling the story, right? Narrating. One of things Malo, one of my former uh bosses told me was like, tell the story, right? Narrate the story down to your thought process of like, hey, we were considering this, and then we almost went there, but we didn't go there because making this up because this is not compliant, right? And so
Right.
therefore we
Right.
pivoted here, and then we ultimately landed and really like narrating like the thought process. And it may seem like overkill, but even that can be helpful to folks, and to understand kind of where you ultimately land.
Love it. Sage advice. All right.
Yeah.
Final question. Any tools, resources, templates, or otherwise that we haven't already talked about that we should link in the show notes for guests?
Um, well, we've talked about it. I would just say I'm happy the 3 E's or 3 E's and a O framework from CSGF. I think there's the visual, and happy to share that. And also
Perfect.
happy to share. No, folks are interested. I have an example of kind of the decision tree framework we used and the metrics that we talked about. We kind of tried to develop a red, yellow, green on each of the metrics, and then tie that
Cool.
back to the decision tree. So I'm happy to share that again.
That'd
It's
be
not
awesome.
perfect, but it may spawn some thought, or folks find it useful. Happy to share that.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being generous with your time, sharing more
Yeah,
about your
absolutely.
experience at Aspire. It was great having you on.
All right. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.